consumer boycotts are the reason that President Trump and some of his team have referred to Canada as being mean and nasty to deal with.
Ontario's premier says Canada needs to match President Donald Trump's tariffs dollar for dollar.
Donald Trump doesn't usually hold back, but this time his words triggered something deeper than political drama. Standing before a crowd of business leaders in Washington, his hand-picked ambassador to Canada explained why Trump sees Canadians as mean and nasty to deal with. Not because of military threats or major trade violations, but because Canadians are quietly boycotting U.S. travel and refusing to buy American alcohol. On the surface, it sounded like a throwaway insult. But what it revealed was something far more telling. That the Canadian public's grassroots reaction, one without protest or megaphones, was working. It began with tariffs. Steel, lumber, aluminum sectors deeply tied to Canadian jobs were suddenly slapped with high U.S. duties in early 2025. Then came the rhetoric. Trump's remarks about Canada taking advantage of America sparked anger and confusion. Instead of shouting back, Canadians changed their habits. By July 2025, according to data from international travel platforms like Hopper and Expedia, flights from Canada to the U.S. dropped by over 26%. Alberta and British Columbia led the decline. Meanwhile, Canadian liquor boards from Ontario to Quebec reported a dramatic drop in American alcohol sales. In some cases, shelves were restocked entirely with domestic or European brands. At the same time, retail movements like Buy Canadian surged. Independent shops across Ottawa, Montreal, and Vancouver said their sales of Canadian-made goods had doubled compared to the same period last year. What started as a reaction became a movement, and it got Washington's attention.
Obviously, Canadians are outraged. I say Canadians stick with it, hold the line.
BC Premier David Eby says Hoekstra's remarks show Canada's efforts to stand up to Trump are, quote, having an impact.
If Trump thought provinces would buckle under pressure, he misread the room. British Columbia Premier David Eby publicly challenged the tone coming out of Washington. He didn't just defend the boycott, he said it was proof that Canadians were finally being heard. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford took a different but equally firm approach. Instead of backing down, he called on Ottawa to respond with equal tariffs dollar for dollar. In his words, showing weakness would only invite more pressure. Across the political spectrum, premiers aligned on one message. Canadians have the right to protect their economy and sovereignty, even if that means spending differently.
We should note.
To our friends and neighbors in Canada, the Granite State sends you our greetings and says we miss you.
The ambassador's comments may have sparked outrage, but not everyone in the U.S. echoed that tone. Just days later, a bipartisan group of U.S. senators visited Ottawa. Unlike the ambassador, they didn't criticize Canadians. They expressed concern. New Hampshire's Maggie Hassan and Nevada's Catherine Cortez Minto noted how their states were already feeling the pain. Canadian tourism was down, shopping districts were quieter, and hospitality jobs were at risk. In Nevada alone, Canadians usually account for 30% of international visitors. That number has sharply declined this summer, and with it, millions in revenue. What Canadians chose to do with their vacation dollars was no longer a small matter. It was reshaping cross-border economics.
Many in Ottawa say Trump's rhetoric just strengthens their resolve to buy Canadian and boycott travel down south.
Some might say skipping a trip or switching a brand is too small to matter. But collectively, these choices created pressure, the kind that even Trump's administration couldn't ignore. This wasn't about emotion. It was about agency. Canadians didn't need to shout. Their wallet spoke for them. And if those choices made them seem mean and nasty, then perhaps that label was never really an insult, but a sign of strength.
I think Trump is Trump, and, we listen to him, and then we just let one thing, what he says, go through one ear and out the other.
In the end, this moment isn't about diplomatic language. It's about posture. Trump may dominate headlines, but Canada quietly and collectively is demonstrating resolve. Not through threats, not through deals, but through everyday decisions made by people, provinces, and premiers to stand their ground, protect what's theirs, and define what kind of neighbor they choose to be. Because if mean and nasty means refusing to bow under pressure, then Canada is wearing it well.
Overseas now, and the European Union thought it had a trade deal with the US. That's until further concessions were requested from the White House last week.
Just weeks ago, the United States and the European Union were closing in on a deal. After months of back and forth, both sides had converged around a 10% tariff ceiling, a modest but significant breakthrough. Then came the reversal. President Trump raised the ask. First 15%, then 30%. It wasn't a counteroffer, it was a reset. Suddenly the finish line moved out of reach, and the EU saw it not as negotiation, but coercion. What had been a pathway to de-escalation became a roadblock to agreement. In response, the European Commission began assembling one of its largest retaliation packages in decades. According to Politico and the Wall Street Journal, the bloc is preparing up to €72 billion in counter-tariffs. Targets include luxury American goods, beef, soybeans, cars, aircraft parts, and cloud computing infrastructure, industries that cut deep into politically sensitive regions of the U.S. Beyond tariffs, the EU is poised to use its anti-coercion instrument, enabling non-tariff penalties, restricting American firms from public contracts, reviewing cross-border investments, and suspending shared technical certifications. The retaliation is not just economic, it's legal, systemic, and meant to deter future strong arming.
We are facing the most significant crisis of our lifetimes because of President Trump's unjustified tariffs and his threats.
Up north, Canada is mobilizing too. In Muskoka, Prime Minister Mark Carney has gathered all provincial premiers for an emergency summit, an extraordinary move that underscores the severity of the threat. There are two tracks. First, to pursue a narrow sector-specific deal before the August 1st deadline. Second, to brace for the fallout if Trump moves ahead with his 35% tariff threat on goods outside USMCA protection. Unlike the EU, Canada has already acted. Ottawa imposed a 25% tariff on American automobiles. Domestic trade barriers between provinces are being torn down, and exports to the U.S. have dropped from 78% to 68% in the past year as Canada diversifies toward Europe and Asia.
Well, the U.S.-EU trading relationship is one of the largest in the world, and we depend on each other for a myriad of goods and services, many of which are critical sectors for the United States.
Does Canada have any cards to play here?
A lot of Americans make their living by selling goods to Canadians and services to Canadians.
Together, the EU and Canada account for a massive portion of U.S. trade. In 2024, the EU was America's second largest export market, worth over $360 billion. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Canada was number one, absorbing more than $390 billion in U.S. goods. These aren't one-sided dependencies. The U.S. relies on Canada for critical minerals, uranium, and energy inputs that power everything from AI data centers to defense systems. Europe, meanwhile, supplies key components, pharmaceuticals, and industrial equipment that underpin American manufacturing. Trump's tariffs might force short-term concessions, but in the long run, they risk destabilizing deeply intertwined supply chains and weakening strategic alliances that took decades to build. Markets are beginning to show strain. Bloomberg reports that U.S. import container volumes have declined for 2 straight months, one of the sharpest year-over-year drops on record. The Yale Budget Lab confirms that U.S. tariff rates are now at their highest levels since 1910. The fallout is no longer theoretical. It's material, measurable, and spreading. On the surface, Trump appears to control the game. He sets the tempo, he defines the rules, and he decides when or if the deal gets signed. But control isn't just about declarations, it's about consequences. If Canada and the EU move forward with coordinated retaliation, the damage won't stay overseas. It will reach U.S. ports, farms, factories, and storefronts. American consumers will face higher prices. Small businesses will feel the squeeze, and allies will begin to question the reliability of U.S. leadership. Trump may believe he holds the upper hand, but if Europe and Canada strike back together, this won't be a negotiation, it'll be a reckoning.
Prime Minister Mark Carney will be at the summit tomorrow. Obviously, he'll be talking about trade with the U.S. What are you hoping to hear from him?
I'm hoping that we can all contribute to the path forward. That means the least tariffs, ideally no tariffs, as quickly as possible.
The headlines are loud. Tariffs are coming. August 1st is the deadline. Canada and the United States are scrambling to reach a new trade deal. Steel, autos, agriculture, they dominate every headline. But in the middle of this storm, something's missing from the conversation. Something big. Energy. Canada's most vital export to the U.S., and yet it's barely being mentioned. No press briefings, no public threats, no leaks, and in a negotiation as high stakes as this one, that kind of silence is never accidental.
I think Donald Trump is feeling pretty cocky right now, full of himself, thinks he's got everybody coming to him. I'm going to actually say Canada's imports of softwood lumber or steel or whatever, a national security threat, and I'm going to put more tariffs on.
So, as of now, most Canadian goods face a 25% tariff under the Trump administration's 2025 trade directive. On August 1st, that could rise to 35%. But energy, including oil, uranium, LNG, and hydropower, has stayed at 10%. It's one of the few categories that hasn't been pulled into the tariff crossfire. There's been no official announcement placing energy on or off the negotiating table. And yet, both countries are acting as if it's too sensitive to touch for now. This silence is drawing attention because it suggests something deeper. Not that energy is off limits, but that it may be too valuable to risk in early talks. If this trade fight is a high-stakes game, then energy might just be the strongest card Canada holds. And that's exactly why it isn't being played. From Washington's side, touching Canadian energy too aggressively could backfire. The United States imports nearly 95% of its uranium, with Canada as its top secure supplier. That uranium feeds the country's nuclear reactors that are about to power a surge in AI-related data centers and clean energy grids. From Ottawa's side, making energy an early bargaining chip could invite dangerous demands. The Trump administration has already pushed for more access to Canada's telecom, banking, and agriculture sectors. Why give them a reason to ask for more? So instead of putting energy on the table, both sides are quietly leaving it just under it.
And then we're also looking to extend natural gas access into New Brunswick and support some of the assets that we have, like our LNG plant and our port in St. John that moves a lot of energy product. Mm-hmm. We also have critical mineral projects that contribute to Canada's defense.
While the federal government stays quiet, Canada's provinces are preparing the ground. In New Brunswick, Premier Susan Holt is pushing the Eastern Energy Partnership, a multilateral grid plan linking LNG, nuclear, and wind from Quebec to the Atlantic coast. St. John's Port is being upgraded, and new pipelines are under discussion to connect Western gas to Eastern export routes. Meanwhile, Saskatchewan is solidifying its role as a strategic uranium hub. Ontario is focusing on EV supply chains powered by domestic energy sources. None of these moves are explicitly linked to U.S. talks, but taken together, they form a clear pattern. Provinces are ensuring that if energy enters the trade equation, they'll be ready to use it on Canada's terms. Prime Minister Mark Carney is expected to join Canada's premiers this week in Huntsville. The focus will be U.S. trade, and the political stakes couldn't be higher. But barring a breakthrough, it's unlikely the final deal will be free of tariffs. More likely is a partial agreement, one that accepts tariffs on sectors like steel or telecom while keeping energy untouched. Not as a gift, but as a calculated exchange. And if there's no deal by August 1st, then energy will become even more critical. Not in speeches, but in supply chains, export routes, and quiet retaliatory decisions. Because sometimes the most powerful card in a negotiation is the one you never show.